OpenAI, Anthropic, SpaceX all going public. Who do you think the winner is going to be?
So I think it's an unusual time in history. I think the big story is really AI. AI is driving an enormous amount of entrepreneurship. It's giving access to, intelligence to a very broad group of people, at very low cost. Google is basically free. And then you have this massive infrastructure build in connection with AI. So you have, some of the largest companies in the world competing to build the model for superintelligence, and they need access to compute and data. And we're seeing a land rush as people are literally acquiring land, building data centers, filling them with GPUs, memory, and enabling this technology that's transforming the world. And I think it's going to have an enormous impact on all of us. Some people are afraid of AI. They think it's going to be, very destructive to jobs and so on. I think it will be actually a big driver of economic growth, a big driver of job growth, but you have to learn how to use the tools. Anthropic seems to be the leader in terms of frontier models and building a business that apparently turned profitable recently. That's pretty impressive. What concerns me about OpenAI is, kind of a prediction of very significant losses for the foreseeable future. And also, I think the open source models are getting so good, and the people will have access to either lower cost or free models that will enable them to answer most of the important questions or solve the problems that they need. So I'm less of a believer in betting on the frontier model company. SpaceX is a very interesting business. The Starlink franchise is enormously profitable and a near monopoly on kind of global satellite telephony. Their space franchise is incredible, and they have an amazing position in terms of data infrastructure. If you want to rent 100,000 GPUs, about the only place you can do that today is SpaceX, and they're earning very high returns on those assets. And then they have their own AI models. They launched a new one recently. So it's an incredible collection of assets run by, the most talented technologist entrepreneur of our generation. And I think the only question is just price. At a trillion, wherever it is, 6 or 7, there's less upside than if you could buy it for half that price. But, I wouldn't, the word is never to bet against Elon. So I think that SpaceX will be an incredibly important company over the next whatever period of time. Anthropic has the lead now. At a certain point in time, OpenAI was the leading company, and then Google was the leading frontier model company. And there are a lot of very talented people running private. I just saw a startup where they raised a couple $100 million in their seed round at a $2 billion valuation, and that was just an idea. And their second round is going to be $5 billion, and they're far from having a product or a service or a dollar of revenue. But there's an enormous amount of capital out there looking for the next Anthropic, and so that's going to be a very competitive space.
Do you think we're headed toward an AI crisis, or are we in a bubble?
This particular company, which I looked at, the investors are probably the most sophisticated investors in AI companies with the most experience, and they're the ones setting the valuations at such super high kind of levels. Look, I think in private markets, there's more risk of a quote unquote valuations being massively above perhaps where they should be. But you're also seeing businesses that are able to go from zero. I mean, look at Anthropic. It went from zero to, many tens of billions in revenue in a very short period of time. This is a never before seen phenomenon. So if, companies can scale that quickly, then you can justify much higher private market values.
What's fascinating about Anthropic is I've never seen a business grow this quickly ever. And apparently they are EBITDA positive, if that's true, which I think is, bodes very well for this company if they're growing that quickly and they can do so profitably. My question about OpenAI, and again, I don't have any inside information on OpenAI, it's just what I read in Fortune magazine or on the web. The business model has them losing a lot of money and consuming a lot of capital in the many tens of billions, perhaps hundreds of billions over the next several years. And I think query how long markets will be willing to fund that. I think the single biggest risk, I would say both to private markets and public markets, is I don't love businesses where you put capital in and you're going to have to keep putting more and more money over time. I like businesses where, yes, it can require a large amount of capital up front, but there's a very clear, look at Uber. Uber burned enormous amounts of cash. Credit to Dara for what he's achieved since he took over running the business and now pumps out enormous amounts of capital. So yes, you can invest in a company losing a lot of money, burning a lot of cash, as long as there's a point where the lines cross and they start becoming materially cash flow positive. Investing is about finding companies that can't be disrupted. AI is the ultimate disruptible asset. or technology. And that's what makes investing treacherous, is that you own a business that's enormously profitable. Management gets, if you will, fat and happy. And then a new technology emerges that just takes away all their profitability. And AI is this incredibly powerful tool, which is why every business is saying, how can I use AI in my business to make us more profitable, more successful, grow faster, and also disrupt or protect ourselves from the incomings. Our view, based on work we had done and talked to industry experts, is that Google, if anything, had by virtue of the investment they've made, the time, the energy that people put into it, we felt their AI capabilities were, if anything, potentially greater than Microsoft ChatGPT, and that the market had overreacted. And because Google, is a big company, global business, regulators scrutinize it incredibly carefully. They couldn't take some of the same liberties a startup like OpenAI did in releasing a product. And I think Google took a more cautious approach in releasing an early version of Bard in terms of its capabilities. And that let the world to believe that they were behind. If you think of all the data Google has, like the search data, all the various applications, email and otherwise, and the kind of the Google suite of products, it's an incredible data set. So they have more training data than pretty much any company in the world.